Wow, Alchemist, I can't believe how much of a freaking nerd you are watching tier list videos. I'm sorry. I just want to try being toxic today, because we're talking about all of the poison cards available in Moonstone Island. This is going to be an interesting one for me. I've done all these videos agnostic of the other elements. I don't want the power level of the other options to, discourage you from using the spirits that you like. But now that we're within poison, I have to make a decision about how much I let Ribite warp this list. Because if we're considering Ribite to be the be-all, end-all poison strategy, then single target poisons are just infinitely better than AoE. And if we're allowing a world where people want to play Marsha or Tattle, then AoE poisons are going to gain just a little bit more value. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do both. I'm going to acknowledge single target poisons as the best strat for Ribite, and I'm going to acknowledge AoE poisons as the single best option for Marsha, and then I'll let, everyone else just kind of come out in the wash. So without further ado, let's get onto the list. We're going to start out strong with Accelerant Plus. 1 mana, triple the target's poison, exhausts. This is the definition of an S tier card. Poison is the strongest damaging debuff available in the game, and Accelerant is a big part of the reason why. There's other reasons, mostly that fire falls off in a really stupid way. Poison only ticks down every time it activates, only loses 1 stack. So you triple your poison, say you put, I don't know, you spend your whole turn, you play 2 poison cards, you put 16 poison on the enemy, you hit an Accelerant, he's up to 48 poison, he takes 48 damage, ticks down to 47, next turn he takes a 47, and hey, you could hit it with another Accelerant. Absolutely crazy, the scale's out of control really fast. Normally in these videos, if there have been a more efficient version of a card that does the same thing, I would demote the less efficient version immediately. But this synergizes with itself and with the more efficient version of it. And you're going to want these in your deck for a long part of the game, especially with how rare the more efficient version is. We'll get to that later. Accelerant, S card, in all game plans, there's no denying it. Moving on to Affliction, the Waldo exclusive card. It's a 1 mana, deal 3 times power damage. If played, goes on top of your draw pile. And then the unupgraded version does 2 times damage for the same cost. This is kind of crazy, wherein this is probably the most single efficient damage card we've seen for the mana to throughput, and it puts itself at the top of your deck, so you keep seeing it again. In any other element, this would be an S tier card for sure, but in poison, it's only an A tier, because direct damage isn't what you're doing with a poison deck. You could, if you wanted to run 8 afflictions on a crazy poison direct damage build, you could, and that would be viable. But it doesn't reach the peaks of insanity that a poison strategy can do thanks to stuff like Accelerant Plus. So I can't believe I'm saying this. Affliction's sitting pretty on the A tier. If this was fire, if this was electric, probably not an electric actually, because it's charging. We're just going to say that for poison, agnostic of all the other elements, it sits in the A tier. Moving on to Bane Plus. 0 mana. If there is just 1 enemy on the field, gain 2 energy. It's not worthless. At the end of a fight, you can use it for some pretty good energy cheat. The problem with Bane Plus is that in most fights, especially the fights where it matters, you always start against 3 enemies. And that means it's going to be a dead card in your hand for the few turns that you draw it. And then once you finally can use it, it's kind of just a win more card. You've already kind of won the fight. Especially against the bosses of the temples and the end boss of the game that are kind of just constantly summoning more enemies. It can be kind of hard to fit a good Bane Plus turn in. So we're going to put this, I think, into the C tier. Moving on to Blight Plus. Deal 0.5 times power poison damage. If the target is weak to this, apply 0.5 power poison. For 1 mana, I don't know about this one. Yeah, it's really inefficient. You would expect a 0 mana card to do this amount of damage, and the upside is only if you're fighting an Earth Spirit or a spirit that's randomly rolled the poison weakness. That's just not a very reliable game plan, and even then, the scaling's just kinda too low. Oh, sorry, that was the unupgraded version. So the upgraded version's 1 times power and 1 times poison. Still not that much better. Again, it's too conditional. There aren't a lot of fights in the game where you're actually going to get this. It's a D tier card. Moving on now to Ivy Plus. This is like the very simple tackle card of the poison. It's just 1 mana, retain, which is something, I guess, makes it a little better than tackle. It just deals 1.5 times power poison damage. Again, that's not Poison's game plan. It's not crazy efficient. I'm going to put it for now in the top of D tier, but when we get to the readjustments at the end, it might graduate to the bottom of C. So we can look forward to its ambitions as a student. Moving on now to Poison Leaf Plus. Deal 0.5 times power poison damage. Apply 0.5 times power poison. Remove 2 armor for 2. So it costs twice as much as Blight. The unupgraded version does the same amount of damage, but it also removes 2 armor. This just doesn't scale at all. It's inefficient damage, it's inefficient poison, it's a little bit of armor shred, but 2 armor stops being relevant really quick. We're looking at another D tier card here. The funny thing about poison is that the good game plans are so good that it warps its own card pool considerably. There's lots of cards here that we might play in other elements that just kind of get completely shafted thanks to the strength of poison strategies. So let's move on now to Poison Plus. Deals 1 times power poison. Yeah. This is incredible on Ribite and mediocre on everyone else. But because it's good on Ribite, I gotta put it up in the S tier. Ribite's just the strongest poison spirit, and this is probably the only poison applying card that you're ever gonna want to play on Ribite, because having the single target scaling poison is just so unbelievably valuable for him. And there's not a world where I can't put this card in the S tier because of that. On every other poison type, we're going to see other options later on that are probably as efficient or more so. But in that game plan, we got to consider this the pinnacle. This is a bread and butter card that you're going to want to play with the strongest strategy in the game. Moving on now to Poison Puff Plus. It's a 2 mana card, 2 energy. Sorry, got to keep my terminology straight. Card. If you want to be a little toxic in the comments about me not being able to do that, then by all means. 2 times power, poison damage for 2 energy. Sure. So it's below rate, considering stuff like tackle. And it doesn't have retain or anything, so you gotta play it for 2 mana the turn that it's played. Yikes. You know, I'm already thinking about bumping Blight up a tier just because of stuff like this. I guess it's like... No, it's more... It's as efficient as Blight if you don't get the poison yeah. No. We're gonna put it below Blight here. Just I don't know. Why does this exist? I get this feeling a lot with the poison cards. I feel like we're gonna have to like adjust so much of this up to the B and C tier, or maybe this is just a tier list where no B tier cards exist. I don't know. We'll have to think about that as we continue on, because this is just an embarrassing showing so far, especially considering that poison is the strongest damaging element in the game. There's only 2 fights in the game where poison isn't the strongest game plan, and that's the last boss. Well, no, even there, we're gonna talk actually when we're talking about the next card, why that's the case. But really, then only the boss fights in the Infinite Dungeon, poison isn't the be all end all, because they have a few turns where they're immune to condition damage. Anyway, I digress. We're gonna move on to Poison Whip Plus. 2 energy, deal 1 times power poison damage, apply 2 Tangle, draw 2 cards. So it's below rate on damage, but it's at rate for card draw pretty much, and you get those Tangle stats. We're going to put this bad boy, I'm sure, into the A tier. Tangle's a really strong debuff. 2 Tangle means that for the next 2 turns, the enemy spirits can't play skills. This shuts down a lot of game plans for enemy spirits. And it also completely shuts down the last boss of the main story, who only has skill cards. So you can keep that guy poison whipped, and he just actually can't do anything. It's just his cronies acting, and then you chip them down with your other spirits. And then the card that resummons his allies is also a skill. So this one funny status effect can completely lock out the last boss of the main story, can lock down a lot of water spirits, can lock down a lot of psychic and dark spirits. Tangle is a strong effect, and I believe there's only 2 cards here that apply it, and out of 2 cards, I personally consider Poison Whip the better of the 2. Spoiler for a couple cards ahead in the list, I guess. Moving on now to Potent Pollen Plus. Deal 1x power poison damage and 1x power poison for 2 and retains. Maybe this will be our first B tier card, because it's basically, I want to go ahead and put it. It retains. That's nice. You could save it for a turn where it fits in. For 2 mana, this is basically the first turn you play at 2x damage, which is below rate. But then because of how poison works, it kind of pays for itself in the long run. You know, you get 1x power -1 that turn. 1x power, rather, poison damage that turn. 1x power -1 the next turn. 1 -2 the next turn. And so on, so forth, into the future. So at the end of the day, you end up getting above rate damage, especially, you know, the higher your power is, the later you are into the game, the better the return on this is. But it's not as direct and powerful, and it doesn't synergize as well with Accelerant, or as well with the next card, Purify Poison. 2 energy exhausts, octuple targets poison. So it's double the price of Accelerant, but almost 3 times the efficacy. If this card was more common, it would probably be enough to bump Accelerant down. But leveling up my Ribite to level 70, I only ever saw 2 of these bad boys. So you're going to end up with a mix of these 2 cards in your deck, probably. But every single copy of these that you see and can get, you're going to absolutely want to take it. Octupling the target's poison gets out of control real quick. With certain decks, you can play multiple of these turn 1 and just completely destroy an encounter with Ribite. And with other spirits like Marsha, it's still a funny time. You just kind of spend the whole fight building up AoE poison, and when you see yourself at a threshold to finish someone off, this card just kind of does it with a single play. Absolute insanity. Out of all of the secret 5-star cards available, I'd say this is probably the best of them. It just synergizes so well with Poison's core game plan that you're just happy to see it every single time. Moving on now to Reckless Gas. 1 energy does 0.5 power poison damage to random enemies 4 times. So it's 2x poison for 1. If you're in a single target fight, this makes this the absolute most efficient poison card in the game. It's not quite as good in AoE fights, especially because of the randomness. Has negative synergy with Ribite. But with Marsha's passive, every time poison is applied, it does 1 AoE poison to all enemies. So this is 1 mana, trigger Marsha's passive 4 times. So you also get that guaranteed poison on all the enemies. I would say that if you're playing Marsha, it's an A tier card, and if you're not playing Marsha, it's probably a B tier card. I'm gonna throw it in the V tier, I think, because Marsha's a good strategy, but it's not like Ribite where it's the best strategy. So I can't let it inflate the list as much as I let Ribite inflate. Does that make sense? Probably not. But I admit fully to my bias. I don't like randomness in this game. I'm going to put it in the B tier. It's a good, efficient poison card. You get to a point in a battle where you're against only a single foe. Great. It's suddenly the best poison card. But most fights in this game are, verse 3 slugfests. And we gotta acknowledge that when we're rating these cards. Moving on now to Rhizome Plus. Deal 1x power poison damage to all enemies for 2. So, against 3 enemies, this is 3x power poison damage. Yeah. This, again, it's not... I wish they had a different term for poison stacks and poison damage. Because this doesn't build towards your poison game plan. This doesn't synergize with your accelerants, with your Purify Poison. This is just flat damage in an AoE, about at rate for an AoE, and that's not what we're interested in doing in Poison. I've never played this card, I've had it in decks, and I've questioned myself why. It's just not a great option. Alright, moving on to Siphon Plus. Siphon Plus removes all the target's poison. You regain that much HP. Cost 0. I actually think the unupgraded version of this card is better, and hear me out. So when you're playing a strong poison... Oh, and the unupgraded version removes half the target's poison. You regain that much. Anyway, in a strong poison deck, in the opening turns, you can get crazy poison numbers on an enemy. You can get like several hundred to, if you're really cheesing it, several thousand poison on an enemy pretty easy. So Siphon Plus ends up being wasteful. You strip all of their stacks to heal. So you just give up all the work you did. Whereas the unupgraded version, you can apply enough stacks onto the enemy to kill them 2, 3, 4 times over. And then you're happy to strip half those stacks off to heal. So I'm actually going to put, if I was just the upgraded version, I'd probably put this in the C tier. It's like a 0 energy emergency button to save yourself. But you might want to actually run an unupgraded Siphon in your poison plan just to sustain. And I think it's a B tier card at doing that. Again, healing's not the most useful thing in the world. You can just brew potions to do the same thing. It has a little extra value because it's 0 energy, and maybe in the readjustment at the end, that'll be enough to graduate it up to the A tier. But for now, I'm considering it a solid B. Moving on to Spore Plus. Apply 1 X Power Poison, the debuff, to all enemies for 2. Yeah, this is more efficient than some of the AoE poison options. It's 3x power against 3 enemies. And then each of them will trigger Marsha's passive once for an extra 3 to all enemies. I really wish this wasn't 2 energy. I think I'm going to put it in the A tier. Let me just go back up for a second and look at some of our other AoE poison options. It's less random than Reckless Gas. Against single targets, it's infinitely worse. Against multi-targets, it's infinitely better. I guess that means it kind of just comes out in a wash. We're going to put this in the B tier. It's a fine AoE poison option, I guess. The problem with Marsha compared to Ribite strategy is that Ribite's doesn't. It scales. Ribite scales. He's just constantly transferring all the stacks over from dead enemies. So that means like the more power you have, the more stacks you're throwing over. Whereas Marsha, it's always just 1 extra poison every time you trigger it, and it starts to fall off the later in the game you get. So these AoE poison plans, when you compare to the absolute insanity of the single target plan like Ribite, it just kind of falls off. And so I can't really put an AoE poison card any higher than this. Right then. Oh, I suppose there are 3 cards that apply Tangle. So moving on to 1 energy, Tangle plus apply to Tangle. Pretty simple, pretty direct. This is a card that you would be quite happy to run, especially compared to Thorn Whip. Hold on. Or to Poison Whip. Poison Whip draws the 2 and deals the 1. That's kind of worth the 1 extra mana. I'll put this at the same level. This is just like a cool little tech card to run against certain fights. You run it against the final boss. You run it in the Infina dungeon. You run it against like Water, Dark, and Psychic spirits. And you're happy to disable their skills every once in a while. Yeah, Tangle's a good status effect. This is the absolute cheapest way to apply it. It just goes in the A tier. It's an efficient little card. It does its job. It's not the star of any deck, but it doesn't have to be. Moving on to Thorn Trap Plus. 2 mana. Deals 1.5x power poison damage and draws 3 cards. Yeah, so it's like a tackle, but you also get 1 extra mana to draw 3 cards. 1 mana for 3 cards is pretty draw efficient. And this is probably the best draw card in Poison. So if you're not running any like supports for your Poison units, I guess you could run this card. We're going to put this in the B tier. It's fine. You're happy to have it if you need it. You probably shouldn't need it. Oh, sorry, I dragged the wrong card up. Yeah, I don't know. There's so many good 1 energy cards in Poison that I don't think I can give it any higher than that. It's expensive. It does good work. It's low scaling. It doesn't have a lot of synergies. It's just flat damage. But at the end of the day, it could be, you know, the only viable draw plan you have if you're only running Poison. I guess you could run neutral cards that kind of do it better. We're going to leave it here in the B tier. I could see the argument for bumping it down to C. And maybe I'll make that argument in a couple seconds when I start readjusting stuff. Moving on to Venom Vine Plus. Apply 5 poison, end Tangle, remove 5 armor for 2 energy. This is fine. I would argue that since nothing on this card scales, it's just 5/5/5 all the way down, that this card just falls off so hard in the late game. Like 5 poison, no scaling, great at like level 2. But once your spirits are like level 20 or 30, you're gonna have way better single target poison options. 5 Tangle for 2 is the most efficient way to apply Tangle, but Tangle is like a techie little status effect that you like only ever need to apply a couple of to shut down an enemy. And then removing 5 armor, again, great at like level 5, but at level 50, it just doesn't scale hard enough to do anything. This card just suffers from being a 2 mana card that doesn't scale in any way, shape, or form. The 5 Tangle is good, but I think the other effects on this card weigh it down. I don't know. Would I play a card that was 5 Tangle for 2 and then just ignore everything else? Maybe. I might. Put this in the B tier, I think. Because 5 Tangle's good. You just gotta play this card every 5 turns, basically, compared to Poison Whip and Tangle that you'd have to play every 2 turns. So it ends up being more mana efficient than those cards. Like infinitely more mana efficient than Poison Whip, actually. Except that you get the card draw on Poison Whip. I don't know. Now I'm looking at Thorn Trap. I think I'd rather Poison Whip than Thorn Trap, so that makes sense. Would I rather Poison Whip than Venom Vine? I think so. I think drawing 3 is more valuable than the armor, and dealing. But dealing poison on Venom Vine is more valuable than the flat poison damage on Poison Whip. So maybe they just kind of come out in the wash. No, the card draw is like infinitely more valuable. This is fine, I think. All right. So moving on to adjustments. Let's think about this for just a second. Sorry, I'm gonna scroll up through my notes real quick. I think we're gonna drop Potent Pollen down to the top of C tier. We're gonna put Bane below Rhizome, I think. I think we graduate Blight from the bottom of D to the top of C. Nah, it stays where it is. We're gonna demote Spore from the B tier to the top of C. And adjusting within, this is all fine. This is all fine. We're gonna move this to the top. Now we're gonna acknowledge the Marsha plan and leave that where it is. I think the rest of these are all just fine. I think this is just kind of where everything works out. I could probably adjust the stuff down here. Ivy kind of belongs at the bottom now. I don't know. Is Ivy the worst poison card? Yeah, it's just generic damage. The fact that it retains is pretty cool, but other than that, it's just a tackle. And would you want to retain a tackle? Not really. Poison Leaf might be better than Puff Poison. Yeah, sure. 2 Armor Shred, sure. This is the list. Don't really know what else to say? Poison's an interesting pool of cards. Ribite completely warps the plan. This is basically just like the Ribite tier cards. This is like the agnostically okay poison plan. This is like cards that are good on Marsha, some support for the Ribite plan, and then, you know, some inefficient utility. Then we got just inefficient damage pretty much at the rest of the list. So that's it. How's it? Oh, let me scroll back up so you can see the whole list again. Sorry, I was waving at the Ribite stuff when it wasn't visible. I accidentally scrolled down there, but you get the point. Good cards, great cards. Poison's an interesting one, whereas it completely warps the game around its best cards. Its best cards are the absolute best damage plan in the game, and then everything else is kind of just mediocre trash. Just like all the most toxic pro gamers out there, you know, it really gets the try-hard sweat energy. Now, this has been Alex, Alchin, Altoon, whatever the heck you want to call me. This is my tier list. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something from it. I hope that if you have dissenting opinions, you will spit them out as toxically as possible in the comments below. Give me all your poison. Give me all your vitriol. I can take it. I'm the strongest YouTuber there is. And if you want to see proof of that, check out my stream sometime. Check out my other videos. Subscribe to the channel. I hope to do a lot of content like this in the future for this and other games. I picked up Anode Heart recently. Once I finish my Final Fantasy streams, I'm going to stream Anode Heart next. Well, no. I think I'm going to stream a couple of like really short games in a row. I'm going to stream To the Moon and maybe like Little Gator Game and a couple other quick little games. But the next long game I'm going to play is Anode Heart. And I'll probably have some content for tier lists for that game as well. So if you're interested in other creature collectors, please keep your eye on the channel. I'd be happy to have a relationship with all of you, you know, a friendship that stretches on beyond this one game and this one video. But hey, if this is all you wanted to come here for, that's fine too. I appreciate every moment you choose to spend with me and every comment, like, share that you do of this and my other videos. So until next time, all I have to say is bye-bye, hopefully just for now.